colonialism today is almost only ever referred to in the negative sense. And we're going to be challenging that narrative today in this episode. So guys, I just want to say this is probably going to be my most controversial episode I have ever recorded. I do want to say, to kind of preface this episode about colonialism, that I do not excuse any of the abuses actually carried out by any empire throughout the world, whether that be the Spanish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or even the Aztec or Incan empires. I do not excuse any abuses. Obviously, any type of torture for humans or abuses, anything like that, obviously not tolerated. Whether we're talking about the indigenous people from Latin America, or whether we're talking about the Muslims in the Middle East, or, Spanish Empire too. All right, so yeah, already we're getting off to a controversial start, so this is going to be great. But so the case I'm going to be making in this episode is that the act of a stronger and more technologically advanced nation subjugating a weaker nation is not always a bad thing, and in fact, there are benefits to both nations. We'll be talking about that later in the episode. So the structure of it is basically going to be, there's going to be 3 points. I'm going to hit 3 points of how colonialism is beneficial to both the colonial power and the nation being colonized. So guys, hope you enjoy this video. It took a lot to record all this, so hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure to like, subscribe, and of course, have a great time. We're getting straight into it right after this intro. So the first kind of conflict we're going to look at is the conflict of religion. So in almost all instances of colonialism, there is a bit of a conflict between the colonizer religion and the native people's religion, whether that means that the colonization is directly driven by religion, or if it's an organic kind of symptom of the act of colonization. So I think that this can have multiple different effects, and we're going to talk about those later. But first, I want to point out some very specific examples of times when these two religions might have come into conflict. So first, I think the one that probably comes to most people's mind is the Aztecs and the Spanish conquistadors. So obviously the conquistadors, they come into Mexico, they start tearing down Aztec statues, all that sort of stuff, right? And then they put up pictures of the Holy Mother. They put up pictures of, they put up crosses, things like that. They bring their Catholic faith into this land that was mostly pagan. And then also you have the Ottomans obviously putting to death the Christians in the areas that they conquered. So, or putting to death, or taxing. So like there was definitely conflict there between these two religions, the native people's religion and the colonizer nation. Now I think the major question that we really do need to ask is this moral? So this can obviously be a very complicated issue. It's very nuanced. So I think I'll attempt to be as objective as possible, as I always hope to do in all of my episodes. So let's take the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs just as an example. So on one side we have the Aztecs, who their religion involved a child sacrifice and other kind of very obvious evils and perversions. Now, if you and me cannot agree that child sacrifice is evil, then I'm going to be honest, I don't think we're going to agree on much. I think we're probably going to disagree on a lot of major issues. But for those of you who do agree with me that child sacrifice is very evil, then you can definitely understand why these Christian Spaniards coming in, and of course a major feature of Christianity is that we don't sacrifice children. I feel like that should be kind of a given, but Christian Spaniards come in and they throw down these temples in these Aztec places of worship, and in their place they put up Christian symbols. So I think in the end this was definitely a net good. I think sacrificing children is always evil, and I hope that most of my audience can definitely agree with me on that. So I think that it provides a good moral framework for the nations to be thriving here in Mexico, or modern day Mexico, I guess. I do feel like I can comfortably say that Christian religiosity spreading to these areas through colonialism was generally a good thing, especially in this specific context where you did have these very degenerate practices that these natives were practicing. And you had Christianity coming in here and saying, yeah, no, we're not going to sacrifice our children on altars to gods. So I think that as a whole, you definitely see a good thing happening there, and I hope you guys can agree with me. I think I'm not too scared of making a claim like that, saying that Christianity was good. Of course, there are other examples too. This isn't the only example of something like that. Obviously, in India, you had the Wadi burnings, or I don't know how you pronounce that. But in India, basically, if a widow's husband died, she would throw herself on the funeral bonfire, basically. And the British came in. They were like, yeah, no, maybe don't do that. Now, it's interesting. It wasn't like just a cultural practice. It was 100% like an obligation. It wasn't a practice. It was like an obligation for widows to do this. Obviously, that's evil. You shouldn't just be forced to kill yourself if your husband dies. I think most people would agree on that. So definitely another benefit of this. And there are many examples throughout history of all of this too. So I hope I've convinced you guys that Christian religiosity spreading through colonialism did have benefits. If you can only grant it that it stopped child sacrifice in the Aztec lands, then I hope you guys can agree with me on that it was a good thing. It was a benefit to both the colonized nation and the colonizers. So the second point I want to make is about the technology deficit between the colonizers and the colonized. Now, obviously, the first thing that most people think of is the difference in weapons of war. Obviously, the Europeans had guns and armor and metal weapons, and they were able to defeat the natives. Now, I would argue that that's not even the biggest impact of this technology deficit. I think the biggest impact of this technology deficit is the advancements that the Europeans brought, such as, advanced infrastructure. They brought safety, medicine, things like that, things that were really hard to come by or even non-existent in a lot of these native areas. Take the African nations, for example. To pick anyone, honestly. Obviously, it's very hard to get water in Africa. It's a very dry place. And when the Europeans came, they had advanced techniques for digging wells, for irrigation, things like that. And that vastly improved African quality of life and, of course, health. So I think that there are very obvious benefits here for the colonized when these colonizers come in, and they definitely bring in a lot of technological advancement. And of course, in the places that these colonizers took over, they also improved roads, city defenses, medicinal practices, and of course, markets, often boosting the area's economy, their birth rate, and ease of access to the cities and throughout the countryside. Colonizing natives undoubtedly brought much needed advancements in technology to their colonized societies. Yeah, so I hope I convinced you on that point. I think it's probably the weakest point here. And this is a place where I do want to say again, I think I said this in the teaser, but if you guys have any contention with anything that I'm saying in this episode, comment down below. I will be reading every single comment that gets commented down here, and we will do an episode where I might not go over every single comment, but I will go over some of the main comments here, the most liked comments in the comment section, and I will refute some of your points, and maybe I'll grant you some of your points, because I do recognize that I don't know everything, you don't know everything. We're all kind of on this journey together, trying to find the truth, especially with a very controversial topic like colonialism. So guys, subscribe, comment down below, and maybe you'll be featured on my episode, because that'd be kind of cool. I look forward to that. All right, so the last point that we will be talking about is tribalism versus statism. So this mostly applies to the more politically developed nations of Europe and their conquest of the tribal peoples. First off, as it is with much colonialism, there's an obvious difference in political or civic development, which, of course, to some people in our society, automatically means that there is some sort of privilege held by the more developed side. And then they often see the other side as oppressed. But rather than actually grant Europe the hardships that they had to go through to form the modern nation state, instead they just call you names if you bring it up. The British Empire, to name an example of this, brought European ideas of government, laws, and justice to India, something that has mostly stuck with them to this day, similar to the Islamic conquests of the African Berbers. Now, once again, we ask this question: is this a good thing? One side may tell you that this ruined the political systems of the indigenous people. In reality, the systems implemented by England, especially after its abolishment of slavery, provided a structural political basis for the modern nation-state of India and various other nations around the world. They drew the warring nations together into a sprawling empire. Similarly, they provided a system of justice that didn't rely on rituals and superstition. I can say pretty confidently that the implementation of colonialism was beneficial for the colonized, especially the political benefits of the nations being colonized. I mean, we can see examples of this all around the world. I think it's pretty obvious that the world that we live in today would never be around if it weren't for colonialism. The developed nations that we see in Africa, in Asia, in the Indies, in Latin America, they would not be around if it were not for colonization, especially the Spanish Empire, which shout out to the Spanish Empire. We love them here. Yeah, so this will probably be the first part in a very long series that I do hope to do. I think this was just a little bit of a quick overview. I obviously want to get very in-depth about a lot of these topics. So, guys, get busy in the comments. Tell me how I'm wrong. That's my favorite part of making these episodes. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy hearing your guys' corrections of my ideas. I do. Well, I think it's funny, too, because some of you do say things, and I'm like, oh, goodness, like, I've never thought of that before. I might be cooked. And I look it up, and, obviously, people can make a case for a lot of things. But in the end, you guys giving me thought-provoking questions is the main reason I do this, because I want to have that kind of interaction with people. So, guys, keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Hope you all have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and God bless.